Sir, the Republicans are trying to blame you for the existence of a small air base at Mena, Arkansas. This base was set up by George Bush and Oliver North and the CIA to help the Iran-Contras, and they brought in plane load after plane load of cocaine there for sale in the United States. And then they took the money and bought weapons and took them back to the Contras, all of which was illegal, as you know, under the Bolin Act. But tell me, did they tell you that this had to be in existence because of national security?
Well, let me answer the question. No, they didn't tell me anything about it. They didn't say anything to me about it. The airport in question and all the events in question were the subject of state and federal inquiries. It was primarily a matter for federal jurisdiction. The state really had next to nothing to do with it. The local prosecutor did conduct an investigation based on what was within the jurisdiction of state law. The rest of it was under jurisdiction of the United States attorneys who were appointed successively by previous administrations. We had nothing, zero, to do with it, and everybody who's ever looked into it knows that.
Imagine you're a 21-year-old prodigy, you're getting ready to go to the most prestigious college in the world, a place that 1 in a million people get accepted to. But in the back of your mind, every single day, you're more and more worried about getting drafted into a war that you want nothing to do with. Every day that goes by, you see friends of yours, people in your own hometown, either getting sent off to war or brought home in a body bag. At this point, it's near certainty that you're going to get drafted before you go off to your dream school and fulfill your dreams and aspirations. You're nervous, depressed, feel helpless, and one day you're walking home and a strange man stops you on the street and says, "You know what, kid, you're way too smart to be sent off to die in some pointless war. How would you like to serve your country in a different way, in a more unconventional way, and still get to go to school?" "Well, what do you mean, sir?" According to biographer Roger Morris, several CIA sources allege that former President Bill Clinton worked for the CIA during the late 1960s as part of Operation Chaos. Operation Chaos was a secret CIA program that was put in place to spy on anti-war groups, people who were advocating against the war, people who were colluding to undermine the war effort and advocate against it. So allegedly, Bill Clinton was part of this, and his job was to, go about his business at Oxford, at college, and see who was against the war and just rat them out to the CIA. Now, an argument can be made that Bill Clinton was the single most destructive president in the history of America. And you might say, "Oh, what do you mean? He was the good Democrat. The economy was doing great under him." Yeah, it was the tech boom. I wouldn't give all the credit to him. But if you take a look under the hood at the things that he actually did, like changing the accounting laws to where you could spend money that's not approved by Congress, or selling secrets to China, Chinagate, nobody talks about that, or the 90-plus people who worked with him or were associated with him that died under mysterious circumstances, which an entire episode is going to be dedicated to in the future. This was originally supposed to be that, but I found a whole lot of crazy stuff that nobody talks about, and it's from a former CIA officer, but we're going to get to that in a second. And then there's all that money that was made in very suspicious ways from the time that Clinton left the White House, where they said they were broke, till now where they're worth over $200 million. But to be fair, when I was doing this research, I started pondering the question, was this all something they were doing just because they wanted to, or were they being told to do these things? And the more I looked into this, the more it looked like a powerful force was behind the decisions and actions of Bill Clinton. And don't get me wrong, this was a very sweet setup for Bill. To have the CIA behind you, the full support of them, that's a pretty powerful thing, but it comes at a price. And I just wonder how many of these things Bill wanted to do versus what he was forced to do. Now, he had a bit of an abusive childhood and grew up literally in the crime capital of America. I bet most people don't know that Arkansas, Hot Springs, Arkansas, was the organized crime capital of the world. Roger Morris calls it the Geneva of organized crime because it was like the Wild West back in the 60s. So you got that, and then you got the CIA connection in Oxford. Then fast forward, Bill becomes Arkansas Attorney General at age 29, 1976.
It's very important that the right kind of person be elected Attorney General.
Then becomes the youngest governor in the history of America in 1978 at age 31. All right, then he loses in 1980, wins it back in 1982. But behind the scenes, there's something unimaginable taking place in Arkansas, bigger than you could ever imagine, bigger than anybody in the country or the world could have ever imagined. Top secret mission of the highest magnitude being put in place. So a lot of you have heard about the whole Mena, Arkansas thing, and you saw the movie American Made and everything with Tom Cruise, but here is the story straight from the horse's mouth. So Terry Reid wrote a book called Compromised about Bill Clinton and George Bush, and he was just viciously attacked by the media, calling him a liar, saying everything he said was fake, etc., etc. But here is what this man Terry Reid said, and he's a former Vietnam pilot, highly decorated aerospace engineer, and he was allegedly recruited by the CIA to run this Mena, Arkansas operation. They called it Operation Centaur Rose, and here's how it went down. So February 24th, 1982, a meeting takes place in Oklahoma City in this discreet little diner. So Terry Reid is closely watching the man across from him that he was asked to meet with. And this is a guy who doesn't look like a spy. He's a former Air Force pilot, flew in Vietnam, and at this time he's an aerospace engineer building a business. He had all the qualities that the CIA would love. He was a smart guy, he was discreet, and most of all, deeply patriotic. The man across from him went by the alias of John Cathy, but his true identity was Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, who was a rising star in the Reagan White House. Oliver North was trying to recruit Terry for a covert operation that sort of blurred the lines between patriotism and treason. Spread out on the table between them was a napkin with scribbled circles, arrows, dollar signs, and sort of crude blueprint of something called a money pump. So Reed's sitting there trying to make sense of it, and North is like grinning, outright giddy, excitedly writing stuff down, telling him his plan, like looking like a little kid with a new toy, explaining how they would fund a secret war in Central America without Congress, without oversight, and without even leaving a trace. So what was going on here is that the Contras, which are an anti-communist rebel group in Nicaragua, they needed weapons, they needed supplies, and most of all, they needed trained pilots. But Congress had cut off all of those things through something called the Boland Amendment. And that's where people like Terry Reid and later Barry Seal come in. They were civilians with an aviation background and the right connections and the perfect candidates for what the agency needed at the time. So this conversation becomes ground zero for a shadow operation that would later be known as the Iran-Contra affair, which was an off-the-books war run not by generals or diplomats, but by covert operators and businessmen working behind the veil of plausible deniability. Now, if you're wondering why Reagan and the CIA cared so much about helping the Contras, goes back to the awful, awful, awful foreign policy of Jimmy Carter. So during Jimmy Carter's presidency, the communist group called the Sandinistas, who were funded by the Soviet Union, they overthrew the U.S.-backed Somoza dynasty, which had ruled Nicaragua for over 40 years. And, you know, we always gave them military aid and support, and Carter cut that off, took CIA officers off the ground in Nicaragua. And, you know, in 1979, the regime got toppled. So overnight, Nicaragua transformed into a communist-aligned regime with Cuba and with the Soviet Union, which the Reagan administration saw as a major threat to national security during the Cold War. But Congress, still having a Democrat majority, they put the Boland Amendment in place when Reagan was president, prohibiting any type of assistance to the Contras who were trying to overthrow the Sandinista government in Nicaragua. So this led the Reagan administration and the CIA to find a covert and mostly illegal ways to back the Contras. So the CIA was facing a critical problem. The Nicaraguan Contras, they were locked in a fast-moving guerrilla war, and they urgently needed resupply. But traditional ground transport was impossible because of rugged terrain and visibility. So the only viable option was airdrops. That meant they needed highly skilled flight crews trained for covert, high-risk missions deep behind enemy lines. So for a little bit, these missions were being flown by American contract pilots, which were civilians hired under the table, but the risk was enormous. This was super illegal, and everybody in the administration would catch major heat, if not legal consequences, if they were caught doing this. So if any of them were shot down, captured, this would be a massive front-page scandal. So the agency needed to build a secret training program, like a shadow flight school for select pilots who could fly under the radar, literally and politically. And to do that, they needed the perfect location. So they pull out a map of the United States and start doing the process of elimination. So immediately, all the border states and coastal states were ruled out because there's too much attention, too many eyes, like federal law enforcement like the DEA, Coast Guard, Customs, FBI, military branches had strong presence in all these places. So the operation had to be interior first and foremost. That narrowed the field a little bit, but not quite enough. So the site also needed to be rural, so there'd be minimal civilian oversight and attention from the media. Had to be underpopulated with terrain that resembled Nicaragua with dense forest and a little bit of a mountainous terrain. But most importantly, it had to be somewhere where the politics were flexible, nice and flexible. It had to be a state where backroom deals were a form of currency and federal agencies could operate without resistance. A place where political leaders saw CIA operations not as intrusions, but as business opportunities. The answer? Arkansas. So Arkansas wasn't just rural, it was politically cooperative and already well practiced at accepting unwanted federal projects. The state's power structure was deeply corrupt and cronyistic, controlled by a few well-connected players who understood that aligning with Washington, particularly its intelligence community, could mean favors, funding, and influence down the road. In the eyes of the CIA, Arkansas looked less like a state of the United States and more like a friendly banana republic type of regime that they had worked with in South America in the past, because it was the absolute Wild West. There was a congressional report that came out in the 60s that said Arkansas had more illicit gambling revenue than Las Vegas. And this is like a place that Al Capone was hanging out at all the time. Like a lot of organized crime was going on in Arkansas, and pretty much every single governor or mayor was corrupt or, favored cronyistic things. So this was a place that was a land of opportunity for the CIA. So it checked every box and the decision was made. The secret flight training program would be headquartered in the Ozarks of Arkansas. That's why I say the Clinton story is like a combination of House of Cards and the show Ozark, literally. But like those shows are a mild version of what the Clintons got involved with. It's crazy. So they would train pilots and fly planes, do drops, do exports, imports, all from this hole-in-the-wall place in Mena, Arkansas. And allegedly, Arkansas got a sweet deal out of this where they got 10% of all the revenue that was coming in. And Clinton was promising major economic reform and investment. So there's going to need to be a lot of money laundering to make this thing work. So this plan was going to require a lot of money laundering. That was the main ingredient that the CIA needed. They needed to clean dirty money and send it off to the Contras. So Bill Clinton started something called the Arkansas Development Finance Authority, the ADFA, allowing dirty money tied to CIA operations and drug trafficking to be cleaned through official financial channels and re-injected into the economy under the guise of economic development. This ADFA thing got some heat, but not a lot of heat, and I almost think that the whole Whitewater thing was a smokescreen or like a red herring or whatever you call it to take attention away from this, because the Whitewater thing was like front and center for a whole decade. Now, the main players in this money laundering scheme were obviously ADFA. It was the public agency created under Clinton supposedly to fund industrial development through bonds. Number 2, Jackson Stevens, a powerful Arkansas investment banker who had influence over multiple banks and financial institutions. And like this Stevens family, they were probably the most powerful and influential family in Arkansas. They actually helped Sam Walton of Walmart launch Walmart's IPO. So an argument can be made without the help of the Stevens family, Walmart would never become what it was, because at first it was something that wasn't taken seriously from the New York Stock Exchange, but the Stevens family got it on the map, and they were also front and center in this Clinton administration. Next, Dan Laster. So this guy is a Clinton associate and bond broker, previously convicted on drug charges. The company was called Rand Laster and Company, and it was a financial firm central to the alleged laundering. So this guy was a guy who was a bond trader, bought bonds, sold bonds, and they say Clinton basically took this private company and made it an agent of the state for these development projects. Then there was Worthen Bank, one of the banks allegedly used to deposit and move funds discreetly. All right, guys, real quick, how to launder drug money in Arkansas. So step number 1, the money falls out of the sky into a nice green field in Arkansas. You get a trusted source like Dan Laster to put this money into a shell company, and then he deposits it into a bank. Now, this part's key. So you have Jackson Stevens, allegedly, who's handling these bank deposits. Now, the key part of this is to get the bank to waive the requirement to file a currency transaction report. This shields you from federal scrutiny. Step number 3, you create a legitimate need for money. That's where the ADFA came in. So what it would do is announce a bond issuance to fund an economic development project, usually with a preferred client, which would often be allegedly a CIA-backed company. So Laster's fake companies would buy the bonds. Jackson Stevens would underwrite it. And very important, why we're talking about bonds instead of cash, because bonds are structured in a way that avoids SEC scrutiny. The ADFA is the issuer, and the bonds are backed by the state. Next, you loan the money to the client. So the ADFA now disperses the money, which is now clean, to its client. Then the client gets to buy the equipment it needs to build and manufacture everything that the client, CIA, needs. So what they were doing, they were basically building a arms manufacturing company, or like the infrastructure for a whole fleet of arms manufacturers in the middle of the woods in Arkansas, allegedly. Next, you repay with clean money. So you use the cash flow from these businesses to repay the loans. Boom, your money's clean. So now Dan Laster's companies are making money off the interest, which is now perfectly clean money. And eventually the ADFA can even sell the loan package to another financial institution, cutting ties with it and even deepening the paper trail. So what this did is this cleaned hundreds of millions of dollars that came from basically the cartel, which was illegal drug money, cleaned it for the CIA so they could now do whatever they want with it, which was give money to the Contras or give arms to the Contras. So this basically made illegal drug money indistinguishable from economic development money. And Clinton promised a whole bunch of economic development and infrastructure projects in Arkansas. And somewhere in this book by Terry Reid, it said the money supply in Arkansas increased by like 200 to 300% during Clinton's time in office. All right, next. Terry Reid's mentor was Barry Seal. Most of you know Barry Seal from the movie American Made. You know, he was viciously gunned down by the cartel, they say. Terry Reid has another theory. These guys meet in 1982 at the base that's being built in the middle of the woods in Mena, Arkansas. And Barry had been working with the CIA, doing covert operations, working with the DEA for a couple of years now. Terry was new to this, so he was really kind of mentoring him into this whole process. And they were tasked with getting these random dudes from Nicaragua that came over, and they had to train them to be covert stealth pilots within a couple weeks. So because they didn't want Terry and Barry being the guys who are doing these, you know, risky missions, because they didn't want them to be shot down and then everybody finds out that America's funding the Contras. So they were trying to get these guys up to speed to basically be good enough pilots to do these covert airdrops, which is an insane thing. You know, like they had to do things like fly at ridiculously low levels to not be detected by radar. They had to, you know, fly in like nighttime. They had to do border crossings, do extractions, rapid cargo drops, land on really small airstrips that like you had no room for error, land on airstrips that were like in the middle of the jungle, just cut out in this random spot. So I love the way these guys train people, by the way. So what Terry would do is he would do things like he's flying with somebody that he's training, he's being the co-pilot, they're in control of the thing. He would secretly shut off like the fuel injector to the right engine, and then all of a sudden the person's like, oh man, like my right engine went out. And he would see if they were able to, you know, process things slowly and calmly and acknowledge what was going on, acknowledge what they had to do. And if you're able to think under pressure. So he would just full on let these guys freak out, think that the plane's going to crash, and only take over at like the very last second if he had to. So he was that type of guy. And you know, to give you an example of the type of stuff that Terry and Barry would do, like these guys are like top 0.1% pilots in the world. This is crazy. So they did this thing one time where they were doing a covert operation, flying from America into another country at nighttime, and they were trying to make it appear as if there was just one plane right there. So they're flying, they're like this close to each other, where they're like nearly touching each other, one's on top of the other. Barry signals to the FAA. He's like, hey, my radar's glitching, I'm going to turn it off for a second, like the way that they could track the plane to see what your altitude is. The other guy, Terry, he has his off the entire time. So Barry Seal flips his radar off, Terry Reid flips his on, and then Barry just dips out to like the place he's going to go for this covert drop. And then Barry signals back to the FAA. It's like, yep, we're all good here. So in the eyes of the FAA, there's just one plane there the whole time. This guy flips off, this guy flips on, this guy peels out. Nobody ever knows that it happened. So that's the type of thing that they were doing there. Things are going good until people get greedy, and this is where everything starts to get insane. So Barry and Terry worked together from 1982 to 1986 doing this whole project, and Barry was eventually executed by the cartel. But according to Terry Reid, Oliver North had leaked information that blew Barry Seal's cover and put him into imminent danger, like where of course he was going to get executed because the cartel now knew that he was working with the DEA. But it's a little bit more complicated than that when you peel back the layers. So Barry knew way more about what was going on than Terry did, mostly by design, but a lot of it was to protect himself. Barry starts telling Terry what's really going on, that they're not just smuggling arms to the Contras, that they're transporting drugs into America And Barry goes on to say that he has blackmail on powerful people like Bill Clinton and George H.W. Bush, just as protection so that he could, threaten them with that if he needs to. Like, he constantly says this, dude, like there ain't no currency in the world better than blackmail. Nothing more valuable than that. And he claims to be responsible for Bill Clinton's brother, Roger Clinton, getting arrested for selling drugs or for buying drugs. So this is where things start to go bad in Arkansas. This is what Barry Seal says to Terry Reid. He says, quote, "The agency's getting real pissed at these guys here in Arkansas. Talk about outgrowing their britches. They're stealing money from the agency. That's like robbing the mafia. It's something you just don't do. I guess Bill Clinton and his gang have been working on a lot more than their 10% cut. The decision has been made to pull the plug on the whole deal," end quote. So that's one of the last things that Barry says to Terry Reid, and then Barry gets assassinated, and this is probably the craziest thing I heard in this book that I was going through. If you want these notes, by the way, and you want to know more about this book, I got a great book club where we talk about all this stuff. That's in the link below. We'll put a QR code up. But here's the craziest part of the book that I came across. So there was this alleged top secret meeting that took place in 1986 in this World War II bunker in Arkansas. So here's a picture of that. So the people that attended this secret meeting were Bill Clinton, to the surprise of everybody there. That's how bad things got in Arkansas. Bob Nash, who's Clinton's top economic aide and liaison to these covert operations. So he was like the middleman so that Clinton didn't constantly have to talk to the CIA directly. Terry Reid, who's listed as a CIA subcontractor running logistics and slowly being initiated into deeper knowledge. Felix Rodriguez, who was going under the name of Max Gomez as an alias. He was a CIA field operative and the head of Mexico Ops. Oliver North, who was going under the alias of John Cathy. He was the CIA officer overseeing this whole project. Then there was this Japanese guy named Sawahara. He was the resident CIA agent in Arkansas to transition to Mexico. So what they were doing, they were basically moving the arms manufacturing operation from Arkansas to Mexico, and they were going to have Terry run this whole thing because he was great with manufacturing and knew everything about machinery and how planes worked, and he was a business guy. So it was perfect alias, perfect disguise. The last and probably most important person at this meeting, the most powerful for sure, this guy went by the alias of Robert Johnson. So I'm going to wait a few minutes to tell you who this guy was because you'll recognize the name, and it's a shocker. Like the way they did it in this book, they were using the alias name, and then they eventually dropped the real name, and they list him as the mysterious CIA handler and envoy of Director William Casey. So he was basically there on behalf of CIA Director William Casey to because this thing got really out of control. He was there to reel it all in and cut off loose ends, get rid of liabilities. They're there to break the news to Clinton that they're getting out of Arkansas and they're moving operations to Mexico under the codename Screwworm. Johnson was sent to manage the fallout and handle loose ends and reassert control. And he was the only attendee there that Terry Reid did not recognize. So I'm going to read this a little bit like movie dialogue. So Johnson says, quote, "I am the emissary of Mr. Casey, who for obvious secure reasons could not attend. We are at a major juncture of our Central American Support Program, and I am here to tie up a few loose ends. As you are all aware, the severity of the charges that could be brought against us if this operation becomes public, well, I don't need to remind you of what Benjamin Franklin said as he and our founding fathers framed the Declaration of Independence." Oliver North chimes in and says, quote, "Yeah, but hanging is a much more humane way of doing things than what Congress will put us through if any of this leaks." Johnson says, "True, and therefore, Governor Clinton, I'm going to find it necessary to divide this meeting into groups so that we don't unnecessarily expose classified data to those who don't have an absolute need to know. We can first discuss any old business that concerns either Centaur Rose or Jade Bridge, which are the operations that were happening in Arkansas, allegedly. And I think that you will agree that afterwards, you, being Mr. Clinton, and Mr. Nash will have to exclude yourselves." Clinton looks pissed at this and says, quote, "Seems someone in Washington has made decisions without much consulting with either myself or my aide here. And I'd like to express my concern about the possible exposure my state has as you guys skedaddle out of here on to Mexico. I feel somewhat naked and compromised. You're right. There are definitely some loose ends." Clinton's aide liaison Nash says, "Sir, Governor Clinton's concerns are that there may be some loose ends cropping up from the Mena operation in general. As you know, we have had our Arkansas State Police Intelligence Division riding herd on the project, and that has been no simple task. Even with some of our ASP officers undercover over there, we couldn't have gained any real inside knowledge that had it not been for Mr. Reid's ability to report it directly to me." This thing about Barry Seal getting Governor Clinton's brother involved is what's got us upset. I mean, as we speak, there's an investigation going on that could spill over into some very influential people here in Arkansas, and people very close to the governor personally. Robert Johnson says, quote, "Hold on, calm down. Mr. Casey is fully in charge here. Don't you old boys get it? Just tell me what has to be taken care of or who needs to be taken care of, and I'll fix it for you." The source is Terry Reid. Robert Johnson boasted to the group that Attorney General Edwin Meese, by arranging the appointment of J. Michael Fitzhugh as U.S. Attorney in West Arkansas, has effectively stonewalled the ongoing money laundering investigations in Mena, where the Contra training operations had been centered. It was his impression, Johnson said, that everything was now kosher and the containment was still in place. Operations Rose and Bridge had not been exposed because federal law enforcement agencies had been effectively neutralized. But Johnson said he was now concerned that the drug investigation there might expand beyond his control and unmask the residue of black operations. Now this meeting was starting to turn into a shouting match, and Terry Reid says that Bill Clinton looked like he was about to freak out. Basically, Clinton felt like the CIA was covering its own ass, but like leaving him out high and dry, so he was trying to ensure that they would have his back if things fell apart. This was like 1 month after Barry Seal's assassination, and Clinton was coming up on a re-election campaign against the only guy who had ever beaten him before, the guy that beat him in 1980. So he has all these scandals circling around him. The media's talking about how his brother got arrested for something related to cocaine. They started investigating Dan Laster as a campaign donor for Clinton, and you know that you got all these allegations around him. He was caught with drugs. So the walls are really closing in on Clinton, and he's freaking out. And Clinton's almost going as far as to say that there's a political coup going on against him, like coming down from the Reagan administration, because there's certain state police that are investigating Clinton now. Clinton shouted, "Getting my brother arrested and bringing down the Arkansas bond business in the process isn't my idea of kosher. You gents live a long way from here. You're meddling in our affairs here is going to carry long-term exposure for me. I mean, us. And what are we supposed to do? Just pretend like it didn't happen?" Johnson says, "Exactly. Pretend nothing happened. It's just like the commercial. You're in good hands with Allstate. Only in this case, it's the CIA." What a crazy, powerful thing to say. The guy going under the name of Robert Johnson, who Terry Reid is now, shocked that he's screaming at the governor this way and pretty much putting him in his place, is Bill Barr, the Attorney General that was Attorney General under Trump and Attorney General under George H.W. Bush. And his father was the headmaster who hired Epstein as a teacher. Robert Johnson, Bill Barr, heavy hitter, deep CIA-connected guy. Holy shit. So Bill Barr, Robert Johnson, goes on to say, "Mr. Clinton, Bill, if you will, some of those loose ends you refer to here were definitely brought on by your own people. Don't you agree? I mean, your brother didn't have to go shoving Mr. Seal's drugs up his nose, and your friend Laster has been flaunting his new wealth as if he's trying to bring you down. We're having to control the SEC and the IRS just to keep him afloat. Our deal with you was to help reconstruct the South. We didn't plan on Arkansas becoming more difficult to deal with than most banana republics. This has turned out to be almost comical," end quote. Clinton says to his aide, "Bobby, don't sit here on your black ass and take this Yankee shit." So Clinton's aide, Nash, is black. And this is what Terry Reid is saying that Clinton said to his aide. Quote, "Bobby, don't sit here on your black ass and take this Yankee shit. Tell him about Seal bribing those federal agents." Bill Barr, Robert Johnson says, "Why, Mr. Clinton, with racial slurs like that, the federal government could terminate educational busing aid here. I thought Arkansas was an equal opportunity employer." Bill Barr goes on to say, "The deal we made was to launder our money through your bond business. What we didn't plan on was you and your token N-word here to start taking yourselves seriously and start shrinking our laundry." Clinton says, "What do you mean shrinking the laundry?" Bill Barr says, "Our deal was for you to have 10% of the profits, not 10% of the gross. This has turned into a feeding frenzy by you and your good old boy sharks, and you've had your hand in it too. We know what's been going on here. Our people are professionals. They're not stupid. They didn't just fall off the turnip truck yesterday, as you guys say down here. This ADFA of yours is double dipping. Our deal with you to launder your money. You get 10% after costs and post-tax profits. No one agreed for you to start loaning our money to your friends through your ADFA so that they could buy machinery to build our guns. That wasn't the deal. Mr. Sawahata tells me that one of the ADFA's first customers was some parking meter company that got several $1 million in, how shall we say, preferred loans. Damn it, we bought a whole gun company, lock, stock, and barrel, and shipped it, the whole damn thing down to Arkansas for you. And Mr. Reid even helped set it up. You people go and screw us by setting up subcontractors that weren't even authorized by us? Shit, people who didn't even have security clearances? That's why we're pulling Operation out of Arkansas. It's become a liability for us, and we don't need live liabilities, end quote. So the biggest problem for the CIA at this time is that they couldn't cover up with the drug investigation triggered by Roger Clinton's arrest. His involvement in the drug activity drew unwanted attention to powerful people in Arkansas that were connected to the CIA operations. Even close political allies of Bill Clinton, including a state senator, became targets in the probe, threatening to expose the entire network, and that was the scariest thing possible for the CIA. Bill Clinton says, "What do you mean, live liabilities?" Bill Barr, Robert Johnson says, "There's no such thing as a dead liability. It's an oxymoron. Get it? Oh, or didn't you Rhodes Scholars study things like that?" Clinton says, "What do you threaten us? Because if you are..." Bill Barr, Robert Johnson says, "Calm down and listen. We're all in this together. We all have our personal agendas, but let's not forget, both the vice president and Mr. Casey want this operation to be a success. We need to get these assets and resources in place and get them self-sustaining and prospering on their own while we have the chance. This is a golden opportunity. The timing is right. We have communists taking over our country in this hemisphere. We must all pull together and play as if we're one team. This is no time for lone wolves." Mr. Seal is an example of what happens to lone wolves. They don't just survive in the modern world of intelligence. I'm not here to threaten you, but there have been mistakes. The Mena operation survived undetected and unexposed only because Mr. Seal carried with him a falsely created high-level profile of a drug runner. All the cops in the country were investigating a drug operation that put the police in a position where we could control them. We fed them what we wanted to feed them, when we wanted to feed it to them. It was our restaurant and our menu. Seal was himself a diversion. It was perfect until your brother started free enterprising, and now we have to shut it down. It's as simple as that. Mr. Seal was a good agent, and it's a shame he's dead, but hopefully our new operation will build on Seal's success in sustaining our Contra support effort while goddamn Congress dilly-dallies around the Russians taking over Nicaragua. Bill Clinton says, "That was a good sermon, but what can you specifically do to end this investigation involving my brother in the bond business?" Bill Barr, Robert Johnson says, "Your brother needed to go to jail. As governor, you should intervene and make things as painless as possible now. As far as the money investigation goes, Mr. Meese, who's the Attorney General, is intervening right now. There will be no money investigation. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Little Rock is getting religion as we speak. There may be nothing we can do about your friend Laster's drug problem. I suggest you and everyone else caught with their pants down take the bad along with the good and do a little time, as your brother has. It's a shame, but bartenders shouldn't drink. If some of our people are going to be in the drug business as a cover, they should do as Miss Reagan says and just say no." Here's the craziest one. So Bill Barr goes on to say to Clinton, "Bill, you're Director Casey's fair-haired boy, but you do have competition for the job you want. We would never put all of our eggs in one basket. You and your state have been our greatest asset. The beauty of all this, as you know, is that you're a Democrat. And with our ability to influence both parties, this country can get beyond a partisan gridlock. Director Casey wanted me to pass this message on to you. Unless you up and do something stupid, you're number one on the short list for the job you've always wanted." That's pretty heavy stuff, Bill, so why don't you help us keep a lid on this and we'll all be promoted together. You and guys like you are the fathers of the new government. Hell, we're the new covenant, end quote. Then Bill Clinton says, "Bobby, I guess we should excuse ourselves. You gentlemen have other pressing business, and besides, we don't have a need to know, nor do I think we want to know." So, pretty crazy, right? I mean, no confirmation that any of that's true, but that's what this guy Terry Reid is saying in his book happened. Take that with a grain of salt, but I mean, I could see all that happening for sure. And it makes a whole lot of sense why Clinton has been able to get away with, like, crazy stuff that nobody else can get away with, and not only get away with it, but that like there's an active cover-up going on for him. I mean, it's pretty sweet. It's a pretty sweet gig, but that's why I'm saying I wonder how much of this stuff, like when we get into the assassinations and everything of the Clinton list, I wonder how much of that is him saying, "Oh, okay, this person needs to go," versus the agency saying, "Oh, this person needs to go." And here's an org chart showing the official chain of command and the covert chain of command. So the solid black lines are the official on paper chain of command, and then there's those dotted lines that are allegedly, according to Terry Reid, the covert chain of command. And you see Bill Barr there all the way at the top next to the president and above the director of central intelligence. So with Clinton gone, they start talking about the loose ends that need to be cut. So the Japanese guy, Sawahara, says, quote, "With Governor Clinton gone, Mr. Johnson, I would like to express my concern about some loose ends right here in Arkansas. We have overzealous IRS CID agent taking his job too seriously." Oliver North says, "Does this guy have a boss? Go to his boss and tell him to back off. Tell the boss national security and all that good stuff. A high-level federal matter." Sawahara says, "Yes, boss name is Paul Whitmore. His office is right here in Little Rock. He is also determined to expose money laundering." Oliver North says, "Jesus Christ, just what we need. A couple of dumbass GS types out to get promoted. What's the field agent's name? Sawahata says, Bill Duncan. And his friends, Russell Welch, an ASP officer, and Nirvana bent on exposing all of this. North says, I'll make a call and see if we can fix this. Sawahata says, what about the bribe money? Now, this is crazy. So Barry Seal left a freaking time bomb for these guys. Check this out. So North responds, you mean the stuff that ended up in EM's personal account? EM meaning the freaking attorney general. Barry Seal, God rest his soul, had a very unique trait. He bribed damn near everyone over there. Bill Barr, Robert Johnson says, cut out the code talk. Spell out what you're saying. North responds, Seal wasn't just laundering money and using it for bribes. He was leaving embarrassing trail of breadcrumbs behind for a overzealous reporter to follow. Bill Barr says, where's the trail lead? Oliver North says, right to the Attorney General's bank account, as well as several FBI, DEA, FAA, and custom officials' bank accounts. Bill Barr says, God damn it, Seal's still gonna have the last laugh. What was wrong with this guy? He bought off the Attorney General? What the hell for? And North says, we thought maybe you could answer that. That only makes about 4 federal agencies, a governor, an attorney general, and at least 2 foreign governments, the Medellin cartel, and 56 individuals that had motives to kill him. Then Terry Reid goes on to ask, yeah, I'm glad you brought this up. From what I've read and been told, Seal was under some sort of house arrest when he was killed. Can you explain that for me? Oliver North says, it was part of an ongoing cover-up. We were in the process of getting him out of there, like the paper said, some Colombian hitman. And this is where Terry Reid starts to get spooked and things start to go bad for him because they're hoping this guy's going to not only replace Barry Seal, but be even more valuable than him because they're relying on him to start this Mexico arms manufacturing situation. Terry says to him, what about the photos on the television that President Reagan was showing that blew his cover? North says, yeah, but you got to keep in mind that Seal had a multi-mission. I suspect that Reagan didn't even know what was going on that day. If it wasn't for Bush and Casey and the guys like Johnson here, I'd be frightened. These guys are talking about Reagan as if he's just some goon who you hit play, he goes up in front of the TV, reads a teleprompter. So, if this stuff is accurate, which I don't know if any of it is, Reagan was the ultimate puppet, and George H.W. Bush and Bill Casey and Oliver North and Bill Barr were completely running things when Reagan was president. It's kind of funny. It's like how everybody says Dick Cheney was the one really running things behind the scenes when George W. Bush was president. I would say George H.W. Bush was the equivalent of what Cheney was to his son. That's what he was to Reagan. Bill Barr says to Terry Reid, it's very unfortunate about Barry's death, but we had nothing to do with it. These problems have a way of taking care of themselves. Terry says, isn't that just inviting problems to allow an agent to be scrutinized that way? North says, Barry handled himself quite well with that legal orgy you're referring to. There's always someone who doesn't get the word. Well, in this case, that someone is the IRS agent, Bill Duncan. The guy Gomez says, there's another way for people like this Duncan guy to get the word. North snaps him, says, no, Max, with talk like that, Terry might get the wrong idea. We're not the mob. We don't kill people. Stay tuned. A lot more on that. Bill Barr says to Terry, don't let this kind of talk upset you. We need to get this conversation back on track, gentlemen. Do these answers take care of the Seal issue? Terry says, I guess so for now. Right, so get this. The guy Sawahata says, I'm real glad the governor's not here to discuss a real problem. The state has big money problems. Imagine that. You get hundreds of $1 million injected into your economy and you got money problems. Bill Barr says, what's this, another loose end? Sawahata says, yes, our operations transfused over $250 million into his economy in less than 2 years. And his people stole or diverted from them another 75 to 100 million. Bill Barr says, is he in danger of not being reelected over this money issue? So basically they're pulling this operation out of Arkansas and they need to find a way to cushion the blow because, this is like stimulus money. So imagine you get used to money or it's like a drug addict. If you suddenly pull the drugs away from the drug addict, they freak out. So the state would have a significant economic crash if they just rapidly pulled this money. And they needed Bill to, keep a good reputation for what their future plans were for him. So North says, let's not take this money thing too lightly, Bob. We better do something to cushion the blow. Gomez says, I could talk to my people in Panama. Maybe they want to buy stock in Arkansas. North says, excellent idea, and asks Terry, capabilities are in place here as a result of the operation. Terry Reid says, just about any high technology manufacturing expertise, metal casting capability, node-structive testing equipment, CNC machining, plate capabilities, making perfect copies of Stinger circuit boards. So that's the manufacturing base that Terry set up in Arkansas, the ability to basically build anything you would need for an army. North says, sounds like you did a good job. We better add Arkansas to the list of third world countries that could produce a nuke. So this is going to be a multi-part series, guys. And after this meeting, they're expecting Terry to just, go along with it, help them set up shop in Mexico. But he's still freaked out about Barry Seal's mysterious death. And he ends up telling the CIA that he's not interested in it, that he wants out. But they have a big problem with that. So guys, this is a story that does not have a happy ending, unfortunately, but we're far from the end. And Terry Reid, shockingly, after this meeting, tells the CIA, no. I mean, like, all this guy's ever wanted for his life was to be, like, in the, good old boys club where you get the George H.W. Bush treatment. Like, if you didn't know, George H.W. Bush, his oil company was a front for the CIA. So they helped him start an oil company just to have it as a front that they could operate with in South America. So that's pretty nice. You get the CIA as an angel investor. You could like take over land and like just drill for oil there, and it's basically like a no risk all reward type of situation. So that's how George H.W. Bush got rich, and Terry Reid is like in line right now for that same situation. So it's a sweet deal to be hooked up with the CIA, but he goes and tells them no because he's freaked out about this meeting and he's paranoid about what happened to Barry Seal. It doesn't end there. He gets a very interesting visit and has this crazy conversation with Bill Clinton next. So gonna carve out a time for an episode about the kill list specifically. The reason that I'm talking about these type of topics is mainly because there's 10,000 people out there talking about current events in the news and everything, and we don't even fully understand what happened in the past. So why are we trying to predict the future or like analyze current events when we don't even fully understand what happened in the past to lead us here? Yeah, if you want to know about current events, there's 10,000 other places you can go for that. But right now, I'm trying to focus on interesting things that are underexplored and not understood the way that they should be. So if you enjoyed this episode, subscribe, like, join my book club. I'll give you the notes for that in there. And click on this episode right here if you want to watch more stuff like this. Thank you for watching. Much love. God bless.